Hey everyone, Andre here, along with Tom, and a very special guest today being Giles Goddard of Chuhai Labs, who you may know from quite a few Nintendo projects over the years, including the original Star Fox, Stunt Race FX, Mario 64's title screen, 1080 Snowboarding, plus plenty of other games since then, including most recently Carve Snowboarding on Oculus Quest, which I've been having a ton of fun with. So, Giles, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
That's great to hear. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And I guess we'll just start off with, can you just give a little bit of introduction to yourself? Like, what's your history? I already covered some of it, of course, but just give us your quick backstory. Like, if someone asked you, who are you? What makes you what you are?
Yeah, I have to look at my wiki quite often for this. So apparently, I started in the UK. I left school early in the UK, went to a company in London that was doing 3D at the time, 3D graphics, which was quite a new thing to do. And then eventually they started working at Nintendo. I moved over to Nintendo and became an employee. Stayed there for 10 or so years. Left, started my own company, and that's where we are now. Very
cool. Yeah, that was a perfect recap. Great. So I guess we'll start off at the beginning then, talk about some of your history. Well, not the very beginning. We'll talk about your history perhaps with Nintendo, or if there's anything you think is important leading up to it. Yeah, I guess if I read correctly, if the Wikipedia entries are accurate, you were Nintendo's first foreign employee, is that right?
Yep, I believe so. Definitely NCL's, NCL being Nintendo Japan.
Right.
Yeah, I think I was their first, and then Argonaut, which was the company I came from, sort of changed their contract so that Nintendo couldn't poach anymore. not that I was poached, but you know what I mean.
Right. It kind of just transitioned into that, right? Because you were brought over originally due to your expertise with, was it because of 3D programming with your, with how you were going to be working on Star Fox? Is that what brought you into the fold at Nintendo?
But basically, yeah. I mean, we were the first group of people working with 3D graphics because it was very rudimentary. It's like wireframe, very simple sort of stuff. Up until that point, it was all sprites and 2D kind of stuff.
Right.
So Nintendo wanted to do some 3D, so they brought us over.
I wanted to just ask quickly, now we think of Star Fox as one of the starting 3D points in games, but did you work on 3D games before then?
Yeah. Argonaut was doing a series of games called Starglider, which is originally it was Starglider 1, which was a wireframe sort of Star Wars arcade homage for the Atari ST and Amiga, and I came sort of on.
Right, and it seems almost like you've been largely at the forefront of technology, it seems, when it comes to game programming and design. Like we've had 3D with, early 3D with Star Fox, then we had like proper 3D with Mario 64, although I don't believe you programmed the game itself beyond the title screen, right? But then you moved into, VR now, like, and of course 3D on the, stereoscopic 3D on the 3DS. How's that been for you, kind of like working at the forefront of these new, mediums for games? Have you did you realize that at the time? It's like, oh man, we're like kind of entering uncharted territory here, or did it just come with the territory? And
yeah, it's kind of interesting. It goes through waves of things being interesting, if you know what I mean. It's really interesting at the start when nobody knows what they're doing,
right? And
anything goes, and everything's experimental. That's really interesting. And then it sort of goes, when it becomes mainstream and you get the Unity and the Unreal's sort of normalizing 3D or normalizing game dev 3D, it kind of gets a bit boring. And now with VR again, it's picking up again, where the possibilities with sort of the Quest is less about the engine and more about the sort of the possibilities of VR, which is another interesting sort of arc that it's going into.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Like we're still in the early days of VR, so it's fun to see people trying out new things. Particularly with in your case, Carve Snowboarding, which is the first. I think it's the first snowboarding game I've seen in VR. So we'll definitely be touching more on that soon enough. So I guess what was it like working at Nintendo in those early days? Like as being essentially the first foreigner at NCL, I imagine there must have been some kind of barrier there. I don't know if you spoke much Japanese then or not, but even if you did, I imagine, that's got to be pretty unique working at Nintendo in those times.
Yeah, I didn't really speak a lot of Japanese by that point. It was like 2 years, but I hadn't really sat down and learnt it very well. But there's definitely, being a foreigner in Japan, you definitely get treated differently whether you like it or not. You can never be part of the group, really. So I never really felt like I was a normal employee. I always felt like I was sort of not sort of, what's the word? Special almost. Sounds a bit sort of blowing my own trumpet, but it was like you get treated very nicely sometimes versus being treated like a normal sort of employee.
Right.
Which I didn't really like that sort of special treatment sometimes. I much prefer just being normal. So that was what it was always like there, if you know what I mean. So it was an interesting experience doing that, but it wasn't like being a normal Nintendo employee, I'd imagine.
That makes sense. And when you were working at Nintendo at the time, did you think it was like a very unique opportunity and that you were lucky to be there, or was it just something that kind of happened and you went through it and you just, part of normal life? Or like, it's quite an adventure to head out to another country and start working there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we were doing Star Fox, because of the late hours and the, having to work weekends and all this. People back home said we were being taken advantage of, or sort of we should put our foot down, or whatever. And I guess we kind of fell for that. We thought we were being not treated badly, but sort of being worked too hard sometimes. And you don't really realise the importance of working on a title like that when you're actually working on it. To you, it's just another game. You don't know if it's going to be a hit or whatever. So yeah, I think in hindsight, it's very easy to say, we should have really seized the moment there. But when you're doing it, it becomes a bit of a chore sometimes.
It's work, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's work.
I get that. So what was it actually like working with Miyamoto, though? Like, obviously, he had a big hand, I believe, in Star Fox's development. I believe the story goes that he had the idea when he was visiting a shrine in Japan, realizing he could fly through the archways.
Sometimes it's confusing because he's like 10 steps ahead of everybody. He's already
Right.
thought the game through in his head. So he comes to you with an idea that is pretty sound and solid, but you don't know why it is. So you a lot of the time you just have to trust his excellent judgment and do the thing. He's not always right, but most of the time he is.
Did he do this without playtesting, or did he have his own prototype?
No, I mean we were basically playtesting as we were making it. That's how Nintendo make their games. I think in the West there's the tendency to have sort of very sort of laid out design documents about how things work. But Nintendo would never do that. They're always experimenting and trying new things. And he was definitely into experimenting and trying new things, which is great as a programmer because you're always getting to do new things. And he's very good at pinpointing key elements of a game that you wouldn't really think of being key elements. Things like the distance between the camera and the spaceship, or the FOV, or the just the movement of the spaceship camera sort of thing, which adds everything to the feel of the game.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember any specific moments of making Star Fox, whether it was specific feedback that Miyamoto had, or any problems you ran into when developing the game, considering you were making a 3D game on Super Nintendo, which seemed almost impossible at that time?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few. I mean, things like I remember the intro sequence with the wireframe hangar and the R-wings coming out of it, whatever.
Right.
We tried so many variations of that. Probably spent a month or so just trying different things there. And for some reason we ended up with but I think the problem was that you couldn't really see, if you're in a hangar and you had a camera pointing at the R-wings, you couldn't really see them properly because of the walls of the hangar or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't have polygons there, it just looked weird, so that's what they ended up with the wireframe stuff. But it took us ages to get there. So many different prototypes and whatnot.
That's so interesting. Yeah, but that to me, like, I'm picturing in my head right now, like, that's an iconic scene, but you don't think about all the steps it took to get to that point, and how I never realized it was due to some extent, the restrictions at the time. Like, how do you make this work, right?
Well, I mean, because 3D's was a new thing, you don't know if something's going to work until you try it.
Right.
And that was like most things at Star Fox. It was like, well, let's try it. Oh, that doesn't work. Let's try something else, kind of thing.
So speaking of getting things to work, I'm probably the world's #1 Stunt Race FX fan. I don't know if there's any others out there. I'm probably the biggest fan of this game there is. But in the AMA, you had mentioned how it used to, at one point in time, apparently run at a relatively smooth frame rate, but you guys kept adding stuff to it, causing it to slow down to its, now some would say, infamous frame rate of, I think you mentioned it might be 12 frames per second now, roughly, or so, give or take. So I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about the development of that game and what your thoughts are on Stunt Race FX in general, because it seems like it doesn't quite get the recognition that Star Fox does, except from me.
Yeah, so at Argonaut, I was working on I was a huge fan of what was it called, Stunt Car Racer on the Amiga NST, which I thought was absolutely brilliantly designed. The physics were just perfect. Everything was perfect about the game. So I was a huge fan, and I wanted to try to figure out how to do car physics, basically. So I did a sort of prototype at Argonaut that was pretty good, but it was sort of left in the UK. So after Star Fox, when we were talking about ideas for things to do, we decided on like a Mario Kart game that isn't Mario Kart, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And the first prototype was just a car driving around a very simple course at 20 frames a second, and it was really nice, really smooth. It felt really sort of physicky. I think that's a word. Realistic. It felt really realistic. But there was no frame rate independence in the code, because back in those days, your game it was usually a fixed frame rate. It was either going to be 30 hertz or 60 hertz or 24, whatever. You knew your frame rate when you were making the game.
Right.
So that nobody ever bothered adding frame rate independence because it would add extra computations or whatever. So I designed the game for 20 hertz, but it actually ended up being like 13 hertz, and that's why it has that gloopy, heavy feel.
Do you look back now and think, perhaps we shouldn't have added all those graphical effects and focused more on the playability? Because I find myself, and it could just be nostalgia speaking, they work better with the frame rate than I think they should, almost, right? Like, it has this kind of loosey feel to it, and the frame rate kind of makes it work in a way.
I think it was by accident that they found that it kind of worked for the characters of the cars. I think it was the moment when they figured that out was when they put little eyes on the front of the cars.
Right.
And it gave the cars a sort of an animal-like sort of feeling, and you didn't really mind if they took ages to sort of really form whatever, because
Right.
They're animals.
So would you prefer, do you think, the smoother feel originally, or were you happy with where it ended up at?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a constant worry for me, which was basically, should I go back and fix this so that it runs fast at this new slow frame rate, or do we just try to sort of bring back the frame rate by sort of taking stuff out again? So I was never really sure about what to do there.
And I have to say too, like, as one who loves the game, like the little details do stand out. The things I imagine were slowing down the game, like how in one of the courses you randomly have a herd of deer crossing the street. Like, you didn't need them there, but there they are. And
But it's not those kind of things that slow it down. really. It's
really?
it's the fundamental things like having having too much in view at one time, too much of the course in view at one time, or too much HUD, or too many elements in the UI, whatever. It's the random things that come across the screen that they don't really affect the frame rate.
Right.
Like for instance, I remember one of my favourite things is the water drops. I don't know if you remember.
Of course I do, in the tunnel.
And they actually sort of sampled the screen around them to sort of have a little reflection effect.
Wow.
And that is slow, but because it doesn't happen very often and it's kind of quite sparse, it doesn't really affect it that much. But it's quite, as much as I complain about the slow frame rate, it's quite liberating knowing that you've now got an extra frame to play with. Because a frame in those days was a long, long time. It's like 16 milliseconds, whatever.
Right.
And if you just accept the fact your frame rate is now 13, you can kind of really go into it and sort of start adding stuff up to the limit again.
Well, so is that how? So you basically it's like if we cut 8 frames from this 20 frame per second game, we can add so much stuff to it.
Yeah. But that's kind of the mentality at the time. You think, oh, hang on. So if our game's now this frame rate, well, we can add all this new stuff like a split screen and whatnot. And then it's all downhill from there.
I want to just ask real quickly, with such huge teams nowadays, how big would have the team been about for Stunt Race FX back then?
5 or 6 people maybe.
Wow. Yeah, that seems like nothing these days. So.
Well, the scope of the game is, the games then are much smaller, aren't they?
Yeah.
You mentioned during this thing, part of what slowed it down was the distance and how much you were actually seeing on screen. Is that partly why the game is essentially letterbox? Like you have a giant kind of HUD that surrounds the gameplay area.
Yeah. It's basically the smaller you can make the screen, the faster your frame rate's going to go. I remember there was sort of Doom had a similar thing where you could change the size of the display area depending on your graphics.
So was it a challenge pushing the FX chip even farther than you had in Star Fox? Because Star Fox was a linear corridor-based shooter. You couldn't turn around or anything. Whereas in Star Race FX, you could effectively go wherever you wanted to within the bounds of the course. So do you remember? I mean, I guess that speaks to why the frame rate dropped to where it did. But do you remember that being particularly challenging? It's like, okay, how do we push this even farther while making it still playable?
Yeah. With Star Fox, it was quite simple because it was a linear going straight forward. The maps were basically designed. They weren't really maps. It was like a tracker sheet, an old like a music sort of tracker, where the sheet was sort of moved down, and then you'd have a note here, and then a note here, and a note here. Star Fox was basically that. The enemies were designed, to come in at various times, and that only works if you're going straight forwards, basically.
Right.
You can't go backwards. You can't go sideways. But with this game, I had to really sort of think of a new way of representing the map in 3D. So we had areas and culling and all this kind of stuff. So that was quite a challenge, yeah. But the good thing was the fact that the chip by then was now sort of locked in stone. There was no weird bugs with it. It was running full frame rate, full speed. So it was a lot easier, and the tools were sort of more mature by then. Because when we were doing Star Fox, we had to do everything from scratch. Compilers, linkers, everything.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like a pretty big undertaking. So at least, yeah, it sounds like you were in a better place when starting on Stunt Race FX, right? Did you have any experience yourself with the second version of the FX chip, the FX chip 2, I think it was?
Was that the one they used on Yoshi?
Yeah, that's right. I think maybe another game or two as well.
Yeah, I can't remember what that. I think it was just a higher clock rate, maybe. I don't think it really added anything extra. But no, I don't think I ever really. I think Yoshi was maybe the last game to use it. Was it? I don't.
Yeah, I think it might have been. That's right. They went out with one last hurrah. So.
Yeah, I mean one of the very underused aspects of the chip was the fact that you could use it to draw, rotating sprites basically.
Yeah.
Which was a pretty big deal for the SNES.
Right, because up until that point, like a lot of games basically used, I want to say hacks. It wasn't. They just used the Mode 7 background trick, right, where they put a giant enemy on the background plane, which you could rotate, but that was it. You couldn't rotate anything else.
One enemy, and that was it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's too bad we didn't see more games take advantage of it in that case. Then.
Yeah, the chip, although it was used for 3D, it wasn't a 3D only chip. It was capable of doing 2D as well as 3D.
Right. That's interesting. Well, speaking of 3D, one of the other things we worked on was, of course, the Mario head that ended up in Super Mario 64. But correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it started off as a tech demo before ending up in the game. So could you tell us more about how that came to be and what it was like making this, taking Mario, which we'd only seen in 2D up to that point, basically, into a 3D space?
Yeah, so when we were developing the N64 with SGI, all of the AD got given various SGI machines, workstations, like Indigos and Indies, and we had one Onyx in the back that was running the actual hardware in an emulation mode, if you see what I mean. An Onyx was a big, huge sort of fridge-type supercomputer, basically, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I had an Indie. All the programmers had Indies, which are these really cool, flat sort of workstations, and they had a camera attached to the display. And I thought it would be cool to just sort of play around with GL, which became OpenGL, to capture the camera and sort of display 3D based on what was happening on the camera. And one of the easy ways of doing that is to get a ping pong ball and paint it fluorescent colour so that it's easier to detect, and then track those points on the screen and then sort of move objects around with that. And at that point I was also experimenting with skinning, mesh skinning, and bones and IK and lighting and stuff like that. So the Mario face was basically a way of putting all those sort of experiments into one thing. So we did a Mario face sort of little tech demo. Miyamoto sees it one day and says, "Oh, that's cool. Can I have that?"
Well, one of the most fun title screens of all time, I'd say. So.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out why it was in there. Because it wasn't really a loading. There was nothing to load. So it was probably just on a whim that it got put in.
Wow. Was that strange for you at all, or was it just like another aspect of the job? I mean, just to see
that's exactly, everything was like that. Everything was sort of kind of trial and error.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's probably. I mean, whenever I think of the game, it's one of the things that stands up first is Mario's giant head greeting you. So. And were you so was it your idea too to let you play with the face, like grab it and maneuver things around or manipulate parts of it?
Yeah, because that was the way of showing the IK tech and the skinning tech. Mm-hmm. The fact that it wasn't just an animation of a head; you could actually move these bones wherever you wanted. So that's why I put that in, because it was. Otherwise, you just got this animating head, and you didn't really know why it was cool.
Right. Yeah.
So I wanted the interactive part of it to show that.
And I believe it showcased technology that we wouldn't see, or some elements of technology that we wouldn't see in games until quite some time later. I don't think we saw skinned characters in real time in a game on 64 at least until Diddy Kong Racing the following year. So, whereas Mario 64 himself, if I remember correctly, he's just like a bunch of shapes put together, he's, or Mario himself rather, there's no skinning on him or anything, so.
Yeah, I mean that was exactly why I was making that kind of tech, because we were figuring out ways of stopping that sort of limb, that horrible sort of joint effect you've got with fixed meshes like that.
That makes sense.
But it was pretty CPU intensive, so you couldn't use it everywhere. You'd have to be very careful about how often it was used.
And did you mention using ping pong balls for face tracking. Was that basically like an early version of motion capture? I feel like that might be like one of the first in games, probably.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think the camera was, it was color, but it was very difficult to sort of figure out you know where your hands were in the camera. So I thought, there has to be some way of sort of having points in that I could detect in code. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I had sort of various things I was trying out, sort of arms. I had I think it was a juggling thing at one point where you'd hold the ping pong balls here, or you'd have them on your fingers and you could do that and juggle balls in 3D, mm-hmm. which was quite cool. So yeah, I guess it was early motion capture, but I did realise that you couldn't really have that many ping pong balls on the screen at one time because it was quite difficult to track them all.
I see.
Would have been very much harder to be a VTuber back then, I guess.
Yeah.
But sort of speaking of arms moving around, did you also work on the Zelda demo at the 1995 trade show, like an early N64 Zelda demo, and what was that like?
That was just to show off again, that was a tech demo to show off the tech we were working on, which was things like dynamic lights and particles and probably environment mapping, but that's not really a tech. But it was also a way of sort of showing that we had something for Zelda. Zelda was there doing something rather than just an announcement. They wanted to actually show something, because I think at that point there was really nothing much to show. So I think, it was the Shishinko, was it 95, was it?
I believe so, yeah.
That was with me and Koizumi again, Koizumi-san, the guy that modelled the Mario face.
Did he model the characters in that Zelda demo as well then?
Yeah, I think he modelled them and animated them as well.
Okay, got it. I see. So that was obviously a real-time demo then, and you did the programming for. Yeah,
it was an animated. Everything was sort of scripted, animated, but it was real time. You can move the camera around.
It's so interesting that, like, I'm thinking back now to even with the Wii U, Nintendo had a like real-time Zelda demo there too, where you could like move the camera around and stuff. I guess they love those using Zelda for those 3D tech demos. So.
Yeah, I guess some of these things they become sort of. I don't know. It's quite so well known that people, when they, it's a known quantity when you get something like that. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, we've been talking about demos. Now, I believe you had mentioned during the Reddit AMA that there was an F-Zero prototype at some point with realistic physics. I was wondering if you could just tell us if there's any more to be said about that at all. But the concept intrigued me, where like where the cars, it could just cause like a pileup, I guess.
Well, that was actually quite later on. That was sort of at Vitae, after I'd left Nintendo to start my own company. It was after Steel Diver and Sub Wars. We were trying to think of just stuff to do, and I thought it would be really cool to have an ultra realistic F-Zero, still with sort of really cool futuristic graphics, whatever, but just really realistic physics. I thought that would be a really interesting thing to try out. So we made a demo for the Switch and PC, whatever. It was more to show the capability of our engine. We had a multi-platform engine that was running on 3DS, Switch, PC, whatever. So we just made a demo of some really cool F-Zero cars going around this crazy track, and just hundreds of the cars, using AI to sort of race each other. But they'd all have realistic physics, like really ultra sort of a bit too over the top realistic. So the hovering was actually caused by 4 jets in the bottom sort of adjust themselves way too over the top. But it meant that when there was if you say for instance if you killed one of the jets, it would sort of end up sort of sinking, and if you killed the other one, it would flip over and all this kind of stuff. And it was just really fun. It was like a sandbox type thing, just playing around and seeing what would happen if you caused a crash there and whatever.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, was this kind of like you would turn off jets to do attacks, or was it kind of like
Well, if you bump too hard,
Yeah.
your left jet would sort of fail or start failing. You'd start sort of digging into the thing, and then that would cause you to turn around and whatnot.
Man, I wish I didn't ask now, but like I need this game. So clearly Nintendo didn't. So this was shown to Nintendo and they passed on it, or
Yeah, Nintendo are very wary about using old IP because it's such a huge thing for them to do. It's much easier to go with a new idea, a new IP than to reuse an old one.
that's so sad. I mean, I'm a big F-Zero fan as well. I know there's tons of out there who want the series to come back. So it hurts knowing that there are people who want to make it happen but can't because of Nintendo. So
Yeah, we were kind of stuck in a catch-22 working with Nintendo because we'd say to them, we want to do this F-Zero game. Can you give us all this money? And they'd say, well, you don't have enough people. And I'd say, well, if we had the money, we could get the people, you know what I mean? So it was forever this kind of ridiculous catch-22 of them wanting us to make a game, us pitching a game, and then them saying, you don't have enough people. Alright, so what do? Do we sort of just get we find it's a lump of cash from somewhere, then get the people, then go back to you with this proposal? So it was difficult working with them.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. I guess real quick, is there any other Nintendo IP you would be interested in working with yourself that you haven't had a chance to yet?
It would be interesting to do a Star Fox, I think, but not how the other ones were done.
Yeah, I saw that you had some. I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but you had some choice words, I think, for some of the other Star Foxes I saw. But is there anything offhand you would think you would do differently for a sequel that Nintendo hasn't?
I think I would just dial it back a lot and not put in gimmicks like the stuff that Zero had, and maybe not even put in the free roaming aspects and stuff like that. I would just bring it back, put it back into what made Star Fox the original fun.
Right.
And just make one based on that.
Yeah.
I don't know how popular it would be, but it would be cool to try.
Yeah, back to basics, kind of, for Star Fox. Yeah, that makes sense.
Would you consider like making a game in the old style of Star Fox? Like, have you seen any of the recent kind of indie titles that are trying to recreate that style that have been kickstarted recently?
Yeah, the sort of retro Star Fox things. No. No, I think we if we did do it, it would have to be either an extremely stylized retro look,
yeah,
or just very updated and very modern looking. But I wouldn't try to replicate the polygons from the FX chip because it was, I don't see the point.
Yeah, you don't want to go back to that. You don't want to go back that far.
We've got over that. We've fixed that problem.
Yeah.
You don't want to go back to it again.
Well, it makes sense. That answer makes sense for someone who's been at the forefront of technology. So.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to be doing something new, not going backwards.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
You know what I mean?
Well, it makes sense. And when you left Nintendo to kind of form your own company, one of your first earlier projects was to rewrite Doshin the Giant from scratch. What was that like? And did you kind of have to retool anything? Like, what's it like porting a game but completely rebuilding it?
And why did you decide to completely rebuild it?
Yeah.
Well, they wanted a GameCube. They wanted to take the N64 DD version and port it to GameCube. So I looked at the code and I thought, this is such a mess. Sorry to the programmers, but it was such it would have been such a pain to port it, and also the two platforms are just so completely different. That I said I'll just do it from scratch. So we just basically I started from scratch, did the entire engine and whatever, using some of the assets, but most of it was new assets. I think we just redesigned the game basically. So they're actually quite dissimilar, I think, in a lot of ways.
That's interesting. Yeah, unfortunately, it never came out in the United States in any form, so I haven't had a chance to play it myself. But I might need to one of these days. But I think it did come out in Europe at least, so
Yeah, no, I thought it was a really unique idea, and it had some really cool sort of. I love the idea that you could decide whether Doshin was evil or not on a whim. So you could build a wonderful island and populate it and get all their love, and then just press the button and start smashing it all down if you wanted. And it didn't matter because literally at the end of each day it would reset. So
that's great. Just do it again the next day.
Yeah, it was like a stress reliever, I think.
I love that. Okay, now I think I do have to play this game now. So
I definitely prefer the red evil Doshin to the yellow cute one.
Well, going back a little bit, one of the, I guess it would be, was it one of the final 64 games? I guess it must have been at that point. Maybe I'm wrong. My memory's kind of like, it's all blurred at this point. But 1080, of course. You worked on 1080, and I've got a few questions about that game. And I guess, first of all, you, of course, have, I believe, a fondness for snowboarding, hence why you did Carve Snowboarding most recently in Oculus Quest, which we'll be asking more about soon. But I was wondering, first off, what came first, 1080 or your love of snowboarding?
Snowboarding. Because 1080 was originally going to be a skiing game, because Miyamoto was a skier, and I wasn't, and I thought it'd be a boring skiing game. So I said, I want to make a snowboarding game, and he said, no, but skiing's more popular. And I said, well, yeah, that may be true, but snowboarding is cooler, and you can do things like, jumps and whatnot that you can't do on the skis. So we had this back and forth for a while, and eventually I won. But it was definitely, I was more interested in snowboarding first.
I think you mentioned before that it had started from, you had been doing some, was it IK? I wonder, did that follow up on what you had learned and employed in the Mario 64, or deployed in the Mario 64 tile screen, which you also mentioned had used that as well?
They all built on each other. So I had my sort of engine that parts of that became what Nintendoware became. I'd be expanding my engine every time one of these games got released or I made a tech demo. 1080 was a culmination of all of the things so far. So it had skinning and IK and lighting, dynamic lights and whatnot.
Got it.
And that's why it was kind of quite an easy game to do, because everything was already sort of set up. We didn't have to, do anything from scratch again.
Because that game took 9 months, right? Which is an absurdly short time for a game to be developed, especially for, I feel like, a Nintendo game. So was there anything were there any roadblocks that came up, or was it pretty smooth sailing the entire way? Were there any any curveballs that you had to deal with?
No, none at all. Actually, none that I could think of. It was one of those perfect. Everything just worked. It was a great team. We didn't make any mistakes. We didn't go down any rabbit holes that we couldn't get out of. There was nothing went wrong as far as I can tell. If you remember.
That's awesome. I think one of the things that stands out most about the game is just how good it feels to play. Whether it's performing tricks or just the core fundamentals of going down the mountain. Do you remember that taking much work? Was it tricky to, so to speak, to get the feel right of everything? That was the number one, the thing that took the most time. I think there's a tendency for some of these games to only spend the minimal amount of time needed to get the board working or whatever working in the context of the game, and then spend the rest of the time on the other parts of the game. Which I'm very much from the Miyamoto school of thought, which is, because that's all I know about how to make games actually, but basically is to just keep on and on with the feel of the game until it's just perfect. And that can literally be from day one until it's gone into QA almost. So you're just constantly tweaking the entire everything to do with the feel of the game. And also on snowboarding, on 1080 and things like that, it's difficult to get a sense of speed when the camera is. If you have a slope like this and the camera is pointing that way, you can't tell that you're on a slope because
from the camera's point of view, you're just looking that way.
Right.
So it was really hard to try and figure out, to give the illusion that you were on a slope, but still make it so that you could see the character properly and stuff like that. So
That's a good point.
That took a lot of tweaking, even with Carve as well. It took a lot of trying to figure out what the correct slope should be, and if we use that slope, what should be the parameters for the friction and all that sort of stuff. That's really hard to tweak, basically.
Yeah, it's something like as a player you don't even think about it, like how much work went into getting it to look right, to make it feel like you actually are going down a mountain rather than just skating along a flat surface or something.
It also has really weird, not really intuitive things, like the fact that if you're going down a slope like that and you have a rock here and you jump off it, it feels like if that was in real life, you'd be like, or rather, if that was on a flat plane, you'd be doing this and then suddenly jumping up in the air. But on a slope like that, all you're doing is just going off the edge of the rock. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's sometimes you actually have to put sort of fake physics in to sort of stop it from looking like you're just suddenly boosting into the air for no reason.
Is there anything you would have wanted to do in 1080, or I guess really any game if you wanted, but anything you wanted to do that you remember not being able to, whether you run out of time, such as having 9 months for 1080 or anything else?
Yeah, everything. When you're programming the thing, and you look back at it, especially after it's just been done, all you can see is the bugs and the errors and the things you didn't have time to fix. There's just so many things. I know, like for instance, the shadows. I hated the way that the shadows didn't really follow the terrain properly, especially on I think it was the log level, the one where you had some deep snow and you had to go under a log, whatever. The shadow, there was a horrible bug where the shadow actually goes on top of the log or something like that, I think.
I see, yeah.
And that's all I ever see now. It's just those little bugs that most people probably wouldn't even look at.
It doesn't register, but yeah, that's all. You just focus in on that thing, right? I guess real quick, do you ever revisit your games much? Like, besides one's in active development? No.
No.
Yeah, I feel like it's like watching, like an actor rarely watches their own movie, right? I guess so.
Because it's once you finish it with it, you just want it out of your life, kind of thing.
You've seen enough of it. You've seen more of it than almost anyone else is ever going to see of it.
You get sick of it after a while.
Yeah.
On that note, do you play other people's games though for reference, or like just to see what the trends are?
No, I don't actually. Especially not. I made a conscious decision not to play any similar VR games when I was doing Carve, because I didn't want to get sort of any. Didn't really want to know what I was up against, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I get that. I won't watch most other YouTubers' videos. I'm like, I don't want to know what they're doing. I don't want to be influenced too much, So. It wasn't
really a case of I don't want to be influenced by them. It was more of I just was too scared in case they were too good.
Well, okay. I mean, to be straight up, that's part of my fear too. So.
If you're halfway through development and you play another snowboarding game and you suddenly realise your game actually looks crap.
It's demoralizing, right?
It is pretty demoralizing, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is a great launching off point. So when did you first have the idea for Carve Snowboarding? I mean, this is the whole new medium being in VR. I believe this is this isn't your first VR game, right? You had a zombie taxi game before this?
Yeah, we've actually done quite a few VR projects. We've been working with USJ. We did a Universal Studios Japan, which is a theme park in Japan. We did a VR roller coaster. So you put a headset on and you're on an actual physical roller coaster, and the VR matches the roller coaster movements.
Oh, that's cool.
And we've done a few of those. Just finished working on another thing with USJ. And we've released a few games on Oculus. Well, one game on Oculus and did one for PSVR. So we have done quite a few over the years.
It's been over 20 years since 1080. So was it just it's time to try this out in VR? Like what gave you the motivation to do this?
I think when I got the DK1, which was the original Oculus headset,
back in like what 2014 or something,
13,
2015.
yeah, I think the Kickstarter one.
Right.
As soon as I tried it, I thought it'd be really cool to just try things like snowboarding and see what it would feel like. So I did an really early prototype back then, and every Bit Summit that we had. Bit Summit is like a show in Kyoto, game show. I used to sort of put a little demo on a table and get some feedback from people to see what they thought of the controls and whatnot. So I was kind of picking up these little bits and pieces every year. It wasn't a full-time thing; it was like on and off. So it's been going for a while.
So how much work was it to? I mean, so one of the first things that stuck out to me playing it is just how natural the controls do feel. Like you don't really have to think about them, which is, I imagine, what you want. But there's still, a lot of skill involved in it. I'm not particularly great at the game, but it feels good when I'm not running into a wall or something. So how much trial and error did that take, particularly with the fact that you don't have, you don't have lower body tracking. It's based entirely on your head and arm position. So how did that kind of come to be?
Well, I mean, we figured out really early on that you can't really do things with your legs in VR.
Huh.
You even if you put trackers on them, you don't have the dexterity and you don't have the G-forces or anything like you would in real life to really use your legs properly. So that's out of the question, for now at least. And when you're snowboarding, you're using your arms a lot of the time for balance and just sort of to move your body, because if you're on a snowboard, if you want to go that direction, you turn your body, and you have to do that with your arms, obviously. So it's just a very natural thing to do when you're snowboarding. I don't know if you've ever been snowboarding, but
no,
I have. It's painful.
It's a thing you kind of do without really thinking about it. And that's why I think it feels quite natural, because you're not really thinking about why the board's moving, it just is, and it's matching how you would expect it to match.
Right. Yeah.
But for a long time we had very complicated controls. Complicated as in, I don't know if you've turned on the full edge control on Carve.
I haven't yet. No.
But that was the sort of de facto standard for a long time. But most people just couldn't grasp the concept of having to figure out where your edge was and how much edge was digging into the snow and all that sort of stuff, as well as this movement of the hands.
Right.
So we added all these things after sort of trying it out on people of snowboarders and non-snowboarders and skiers, whatever. It was like unanimous that most people couldn't handle the edge control thing. So I put this thing in to do auto edge, so the game would figure out the perfect edge angle to have. And I think that's one of the reasons there's quite a lot of depth there, but it's still easy. Because it's easy to just turn the board around, but there's so many other things that are going on in the background, trying to figure out what the correct edge or the correct sort of angle of the board should be, that it adds a huge amount of depth to the range of control.
Yeah,
if that makes
absolutely.
sense.
No, it totally makes sense.
Yep.
Were there any other challenges you had with bringing it to VR? Like, I imagine the fact that locomotion, of course, has been a big issue in VR, but I didn't have any motion sickness at all in this game. So was that something that was a hurdle for you to figure out?
Yeah, I mean, stopping people from throwing up was quite a hard thing to figure out, and that was another thing where we figured out quite early on that after doing lots of different VR games over the years, you know that you can't rotate the camera if the player's head isn't moving, because
right.
that's the thing that the worst thing you can do for VR. So we had to design the controls so that the camera never rotates without you doing it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think that's the number one reason it doesn't really feel that uncomfortable for most people, because it's not doing this rotation thing. We actually, some of the early prototypes we had skis, snowboards, sledges with 2 levers, and a snowmobile.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
The skiing and snowboard were fine, but the things where you're sitting on a thing and rotating around, they were just instant vomit.
Ooh.
Comet type thing.
It's extreme mode.
Well,
Yeah.
speaking of like that issue of VR, did you ever have anyone trying the demo and like falling down?
All the time. Yeah. When we were showing at Bit Summit, we had to make sure that we had at least 3 meters of space around the area, so that if somebody did fall over, they wouldn't crash into somebody or hit somebody. But yeah, that was, for a lot of people, they do end up falling over if they're not used to VR, at least.
Was having no cables attached to the headset a big thing for the game? Like something that made it a lot better in your mind?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was probably the number one reason for using the Oculus, because it's just it's like it's a game changer basically, where you can just roam around, do whatever you want without worrying about cables. And the cable issue was such a big thing for us for so long with the Rift and the Vive, whatever. And we'd always, at shows, we'd always we'd try and figure out some weird contraption to keep the cable sort of up above, so you could spin around and rotate. But it was always this constant thing tugging on you. And if you rotated 180 degrees or 360 degrees, you'd have to make sure you rotated the other way around so that you wouldn't get twisted up.
Yeah.
And I'm still really excited for multiplayer games in one room, where you're roaming around and shooting each other, whatever, with going wherever you want. You can only do that on the Quest at the moment.
So are you suggesting there could be an update coming to the game where you're snowboarding together with guns?
No, but I did want to, at some point, I do want to try, a sort of a massive multiplayer thing where there's 100 players on a mountain and you can see your friends over there and you're going down and everything's happening in real time with the other players, multiplayer sort of thing.
That'd be amazing.
Be really cool.
Yeah, like you can see them coming back up on the ski lift, for instance, or something.
Yeah, and whether they're in the same room or whether they're halfway across the world, whatever, it doesn't matter, sort of thing. I think that'd be really cool.
Well, speaking of really cool, actually one of the cuter details I thought in the game was my visor was like fogging up or like getting snow on it, and I'm like, what? I can't see what's happening. Then I just like wiped it off with my hand. I'm like, oh geez, like that blew my mind. So are there any elements of snowboarding that you were able to like realize authentically here that you felt like you weren't able to in, say, 1080 or
Yeah, I was never. I mean, the tricks is one thing. I wasn't a fan of the sort of button mashing key type thing that 1080 had, where you had to basically learn a pattern of button presses to do the tricks. Right. So it was more of a memorizing game than a skill game. So I much prefer this sort of very analog, fuzzy kind of, you just wherever you grab is what the trick is kind of thing. And that's kind of one of the reasons we don't actually have a list of tricks to do, because I want people to just grab different things and try figure out what the tricks are, or even go onto YouTube or look them up in real life to see how to do them.
Yeah, it almost brings back a little bit like that classic arcade, like arcade feel where you would discover people like, people teach you their own tricks or things, like Street Fighter or something. It's like, hey, how did you do that move? Well, here's what you do,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, I like the idea of just people just coming up with their own tricks and just naming them themselves.
Can I name the faceplant move? Can you tell? You're still obviously? Seeing as how games these days, you release it, and unlike say with Star Fox or previous games, you're not done with it, right? You can keep updating games these days.
Yeah.
So, are you looking to add more to Carve Snowboarding? And if so, can you tease what may be coming down the line? Or
there's quite a few updates we've got planned coming. One of the first ones is to address a lot of the issues that people have had with the medals. It's because it's quite hard to unlock some of the later courses. We're going to sort of smooth that out a bit so there's less of a sort of sudden ramp up. So that's going to be the first couple of updates is that kind of side of things, and maybe issues to sort of pull a bit more out of the Quest 2, a bit more performance out of the Quest 2 because it's such a capable device, and the other stuff is secret.
Sounds good. We'll have to wait and see then.
But we're definitely addressing the issues that people have had with the difficulty and stuff like that first.
I just want to ask on a quick note, is having a good lodge the key to a snowboarding game?
Yeah, and a dog.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. I instantly, of course, I had to try petting it. I'm like, oh, yes, you can, thank God. So
there was a lot of pushback from people about the dog because they all said, the naysayers, they all said it wasn't really important to the game. Didn't really add that much. It would be too complex to put in. People wouldn't like it, whatever. But now look at them.
Everyone loves paying the dog, I guarantee it. So, how has it been for you seeing, following the reaction? Like the reviews are all really good right now on the Oculus store. So how's that been for you? Like, it must feel nice, like seeing the positive reactions and in real time essentially to your game.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. I want to get the updates out quickly. That's how I feel at the moment. I see some comments from people saying this is too hard, or if you could do this, that would be great. I'd love to get that update out now, so there's people aren't sort of stuck on the game, they just enjoy it more. But yeah, it's been great just seeing all the comments, and there's so many constructive comments in that list. People just giving some great suggestions. So we've been taking notes and we're prioritizing what things to do next and trying to figure out what we can do with our budget and time frame and all that sort of stuff.
Right, that makes sense. And I guess, do you know what might be next for your company?
Updates to Carve, that's going to be continuing for several months. But we've got there's 2 or 3 lines of different games we have running here. This year there's going to be a ton of new stuff coming out. But unfortunately, I can't mention any of it because it's all sort of secret.
All right.
Is that kind of mindset for your studio to not put all your eggs in one basket and try like many smaller projects to see what works? Kind of like what Ryan Clark does with Brace Yourself Games and Crypt of the Necrodancer?
Yeah, I would hate to have this massive multi-year project that just tied up the entire studio. I think these sort of quite small, self-contained projects are much more interesting, especially if they're on different platforms, different subjects, and different game ideas, whatever. That's quite fun.
Well, kind of speaking of which, then I heard that you created a game for the upcoming Playdate console, which is like a little handheld with a crank on it. What was it like working on basically a lo-fi console? It's funny to me that you're working in the state-of-the-art medium being VR, and then also you made this, what I assume will be this really, cute game on this handheld cranked device. So, what was that like?
I loved it. So I actually sort of took a secret couple of weeks off from Carve Snowboarding to program the Playdate game, and I actually loved it. It's just such a cool device to develop on, especially because you can do it in a coffee shop on a Mac, on a MacBook, whatever, and it plays. It's basically it's the device in the simulator. It's the same speed, whatever. There's no compromise, or you can sort of control the simulator with the device itself, or all these various things. It's just such and it's so quick to make a change, get it onto the thing, and try it out, compared to Unreal, which takes sort of 5 minutes to make a build, or whatever.
Oh, wow.
This is like literally you press a button and it's instantly there. So that
would be nice.
That's great, and also the limitations of the actual hardware itself. You've got a black and white, quite high res screen, but there's only literally just black white pixels. There's nothing else. You just have to really concentrate on the gameplay, and you don't have to worry about the capabilities of the thing. You just really focus on the game itself.
that must be a bit of a relief, I imagine, compared to your more recent, your other games.
It's nice to have something that's well defined and focused, rather than sort of so fuzzy and open-ended, which VR and Unreal and all that sort of stuff can be. It can feel like, you can do so many things, you just don't know which direction to go in.
I'm excited to try out this Playdate.
And the crank is just great. It really
it
is.
looks so fun. Yeah, I just want to sit there cranking it all day. So getting back to VR just real quick. Are there any other games? I know you mentioned like avoiding playing too much yourself, but are there any VR games specifically that may have inspired you, or other games you're just enjoying in general in VR?
To be honest, I haven't really played any of the VR games.
Not a whole lot of time for that.
Not a lot of time, but I did enjoy the Star Wars games that came out on the Quest. I thought they were really cool.
Those are really impressive.
Yeah. Alex was great, but that's a sort of different type of thing.
Right.
But yeah, I haven't really had the chance to play many games. But the bowling game, the new bowling game that came out, I think the same day as ours, that looks pretty cool. So I'm definitely gonna get that.
I need to check this out myself, actually.
And Beat Saber, everybody loves that. Yeah, that's about it, I think.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask, what is your favorite mountain to snowboard on in Japan, and have you ever snowboarded abroad anywhere?
I think now it's going to be a secret mountain up in Toyama that we found with quite a small sort of ski lift type, sort of resort type thing. And it has this back course that is just undulating powder snow all the way down, and it's just so much fun. I spent 2-3 full days just going up and down this run. It's not a very long run, it only takes like 10 minutes to get down, but it's just so much fun. And there's nobody around.
Yeah.
And it's just soft snow, you fall over and it doesn't hurt, whatever. So that's my favourite place at the moment. And I've only snowboarded in France, and it was dreadful. Because they're all skiers, and nothing's designed for snowboarders. The snow's just hard and gnarly, and it's just not a skier.
Yeah. I tried skiing and it didn't go well for me at all. So I appreciate you making a VR snowboarding game, so I feel like I can get something somewhat close to the experience. Especially with some of the airtime you can get in the game, which is just so satisfying to try and pull off like a 1080 or something.
It's cool hearing a few people say that because of the pandemic and because of this and that, they haven't actually been snowboarding for 2 years. I mean, I hadn't. There was a point, I think a couple of years ago, I think I only went like once or twice, like because of either the pandemic or because of there was like a few years ago, we had 0 snow, which was like unheard of.
Yeah,
wow. In Japan. So it's being able to replicate that in VR and sort of feel like you're actually back up a mountain is quite cool, and actually hearing people say that.
Did you plan the timing at all, kind of when the snowboard season was ending to release the game?
Yes, of course.
Genius.
No, I don't think it was. I think, yeah, it's a kind of game that can come out any time of the year, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because it's got valid reasons to come out in, off season, because you just come off the slopes and you want to get back up. It's got a valid reason to be coming out in the summer because it's so hot right outside, and it's a good way to sort of feel like you're cooling off. So you can really release it any time of the year, I think.
Even mid-season is a way cheaper way of snowboarding than in real life. So. Yeah.
Speaking quickly about the pandemic, though, how much did that impact your studio? Are people still working at home, or are you back at the office?
Well, it's been kind of on and off in Japan because they've screwed up the vaccinations, so they keep having these waves, and every time there's a peak, they do a state of emergency thing where everybody has to work from home. And that's what we've been doing for the last month or so. Is I'm the only person in the office at the moment.
So does that make it does that make it a little more difficult to when you're on the cusp of releasing your game?
No, not at all really, because we're kind of set up like that anyway. because a lot of the people we work with, they're already either they're abroad or they're in different parts of Japan, or sort of I spend half my time in Ishigaki, which is an island, the southernmost part of Japan. So most of the time I'm just doing everything via Zoom or Slack, whatever. Anyway, so it hasn't really changed things much. But the only really annoying thing is that we recently hired this amazing person called Kinsey, who's doing she's doing everything. She's just super talented. She's been stuck in the States for, since the pandemic started almost, waiting to come over to Japan to join us. So that's been the only downside, isn't it?
Right. I guess my final question myself that I have is, it's my journalistic duty to ask something you mentioned in the AMA about an awful Easter egg that you wouldn't say what it is. Can you give us any hint as to what it is? No. Not even what game it's in or console?
Oh, I could probably say it's a PC game. It's not a console
PC game. Okay. Got it. Okay.
And it was a very early game.
Alright, that narrows it down a little bit. Maybe someone will eventually stumble across it. So.
Yeah. But I think they would definitely not find the Easter egg because it was just so brilliantly hidden.
Yeah, well, maybe it's one of those Easter eggs 50 years from now. Like we've had, I think we had Easter egg not too long ago from like some game from the 80s that was just discovered. So maybe in a few more decades we'll. I think if it gets discovered when I'm retired, it'll be alright because then I won't care. But if it comes out now, my life is over probably. Fair enough, but we don't want that. So, especially because we want people to get past that forest course in Carve Snowboarding, so they gotta get that update. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna get the update out first.
There we go. Tom, did you have any other questions?
I guess I'll end with the final question. You've always been at the forefront of technology, and currently with VR, what do you think the next forefront of technology will be? Do you think it'll be kind of the chip tracking kind of implants that Gabe Newell has been talking about recently?
Yeah, so this is what's really cool about the Quest. Basically, is that you can see the roadmap almost, where once this becomes this size and that becomes this size, and it just ends up being a little dot that you put on the side of your head, whatever, and you can project anything wherever you want in your environment. We won't have things like TVs or monitors or anything that has a flat screen or anything like that. And you'll just be able to, there'll be no difference between what you see and real life, basically. There'll be, photorealistic graphics wherever you want it. So you can kind of see the trajectory there, and it's going to be, in 10 years' time or whatever, it's going to be so different, I think.
So we can look forward to maybe Carve Snowboarding 2 at that point?
Oh yeah, at least 2.
Yeah, right, might be 64. Yeah.
But I think the only company with enough know-how and backing and money is Oculus at the moment. Well, they're the one with the most likely to. They're like the SpaceX of VR.
Yeah, they really do seem to be at this point. So yeah, it's been nice seeing VR finally get a foothold in the marketplace, and Quest just seems to be doing better and better. And the games as well are just improving. So I can't wait. But we're still obviously in the very early days of VR. So if it's this good now, I can't wait to see where it's at in a few years from here. So
yeah, I mean it's exciting to see a market sort of really start to take off like it has been.
Well, do you have anything else you would like to say to everyone watching the video before we fully wrap it up here?
Yeah, I guess thank you for everybody who's played Carve and who likes it, and thank you for all the suggestions and comments. We're reading them and taking notes, and going to have updates very soon.
Perfect. So that is again Carve Snowboarding on the Oculus Quest, available now for 19. Thank you.
$19.99.
Definitely worth it based on my playtime so far. I've had a blast with it. And where can people follow you at, Giles, if they want to keep up with Carve Snowboarding and everything else you're doing?
I guess I'm Giles at Twitter. Quite a short name. That's probably the best place, easiest place to follow. Or chuhailabs.com.
Perfect, and you'll find links to all that in the description below. Otherwise, thank you again for joining us, Giles, and that's it for us here. Thanks for watching, everyone, and of course, stay tuned to Game Explained for more on VR games, including Carve Snowboarding and everything else that we cover here as well. We'll catch you later. Bye, everyone.